fourth violation of Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium is natural selection. And we've talked about how natural selection works. And this is going to bring about adaptive evolution, right? So organisms over time are going to change, where the individuals who have the better chance of surviving, the ones that have the advantage, are going to have more offspring and then provide that gene more frequently in the next generation. So when you think of the term fitness, imagine, what does the term fitness mean to you? It probably means something to do with working out, maybe being fit and muscular. In evolutionary terms, fitness doesn't mean that at all. So this phrase, survival of the fittest, it doesn't mean the fastest or the whatever. The fittest has the greatest reproductive contribution to the next generation. So fitness is really a measure of reproductive success. How many babies did you have that carry your genetics? So as far as evolutionary terms, fitness is really about procreating. So the relative fitness, how fit I am in comparison with other individuals in my population, depends on how many genes I can give to my offspring that they can pass on to the next generation. So natural selection is always going to favor the most fit. And the most fit always means the ones that are going to pass on their genes the easiest. Maybe this is because they're the fastest or the strongest, but that's going to allow them to reproduce more often. So there's 3 typical outcomes of natural selection, and we're going to use this example here of mouse color to illustrate them all for you. So these mice range in color. We've got white mice over here on the left, and then they get slightly more brown, and then really dark brown to the point where they're really dark gray. So this is my original population. One of the key characteristics of natural selection is that we have variation, and we can see that in the variation in the color. And the other characteristic is that not everybody's going to survive, right? Not all of these mouse colors are equally fit. Some of them are going to be better at surviving than others. So the first example here we have is called directional selection. And this is going to favor one extreme or the other extreme. So here's directional selection over here on the left. This might be a dark environment. Right, so maybe the landscape has changed, and instead of having kind of all of these environments, there's a selection pressure now where if you're a dark mouse, you're going to blend in and you're going to be well adapted to that environment, but a light mouse is going to stick out and it's going to be easily caught by like birds. So it's going to push the original curve, right? The original curve is this black one. It's going to push this in one direction. That's why it's called directional. The second type of selection is called disruptive. And this is where both extremes are selected for, but the middle is not. So this might be kind of a patchy environment. This is one where there's some white sand and some black lava flows, but there's no brown dirt areas. And so the white mouse do really well on the white sand, and the black mice do really well on the black lava flows, but all the brown mice kind of stick out everywhere. And so this is going to disrupt. So the original curve looks like a normal bell curve, and what we end up doing is disrupting it here in the middle and kind of pushing it towards the extremes. The last example is stabilizing. So stabilizing is basically the opposite of disruptive. This is where it's going to favor the middle, but we're going to select against the two extremes. So maybe this would be a brown kind of leafy or foliage or dirt environment, where a medium brown mouse is going to blend in really well, but a bright white mouse and a dark black mouse are going to really stand out. And so what this does is it kind of pushes the original curve in and stabilizes this medium color. One example of stabilizing selection in humans is birth weight. So if you think about it, most babies are born between 5 to 8 pounds, and this is stabilized in this central region. So babies that are born that are less than 5 pounds, those are premature, they may not be fully developed, they don't survive as well as a fully term baby. And then a baby that's maybe more than 8 or 9 pounds is going to be very large. It might have issues getting through the birth canal. This might cause damage to the mom. We might have to go into an emergency C-section at this point. C-sections have definitely kind of relaxed this upper boundary here to the point where maybe we're starting to see babies that are born at maybe 9-10 pounds very safely. But if you think back to before modern medicine, a baby that was too big that didn't come out was going to mean trouble for both baby and mom. So some things to keep in mind with natural selection is a lot of times we can see these really striking adaptations. We think, oh, how did that happen? And it happens by very small incremental changes, right? So over here we've got the snake who can eat an entire egg. It looks like the egg is like 3 times the size of its head. And it has this immense ability to completely unhinge its jaw and swallow huge prey. It can actually unhinge the center of its jaw and spread its head out wideways too. And this happens over time. The ligaments that hold these joints become looser. It allows them to eat larger prey. That's an adaptation. So those ones continue to pass on their genes, and over time, they become looser and more adapted to eating these large prey. So it's kind of this continuous process. It's not like we went from all of a sudden we've got snakes with tiny heads that can't open their mouths, and then the next generation have giant flexibility in their jaws. Some more examples of natural selection is something called balancing selection. And this is when nature will naturally balance between 2 phenotypes on its own. So here we've got some fish, and these are going to be able to attach to a larger fish and then feed off of kind of the droppings. These aren't parasites. These are more like, they're not quite remoras, but they function similarly. So some of them are left-mouthed, meaning that they can attach to the right side of a fish, and then a right-mouthed can attach to the left side of a fish. If the entire pond was full of right-mouthed fish, there's a whole side of this fish that's not being utilized. And so the Microlepis fish here is going to be best off when there's about equal number of left and right-mouthed fish. So you can see what's going to happen over time is when the frequency of one side gets low, natural selection is going to push towards the other side. And that's going to continue to push them in the center so that we have a frequency balance. We also sometimes see something called heterozygote advantage. So if you remember, the heterozygote is going to be somebody who is dominant and recessive, so maybe a carrier. So they have a dominant allele and a recessive allele. And this is common for sickle cell anemia. So sickle cell anemia is when your red blood cells, instead of being a nice circle shape, end up being sickled like a half moon. And these sickled cells, they don't carry oxygen very well. They can clot fairly easily. They can cause severe pain. So somebody who has both dominant traits is going to have normal round blood cells and be super happy. Somebody who has both sickled cells is typically going to die fairly quickly because they're not going to be able to carry oxygen efficiently. The heterozygote here, they have some round red blood cells who are good at carrying oxygen, and they have some sickled cells. You would think, well, that's probably not as good as having all good round blood cells, and you would be right, except in certain areas in Africa. So down here in Africa, you can see this little heat map, And the places where it's purple, we have high frequencies of sickle cell anemia. And those areas are highly populated by malaria flies. All right, so this is where you're going to maybe catch malaria. Malaria is a parasite. This is going to get into the blood, and it actually gets into red blood cells. However, malaria has trouble getting into those sickle cell blood cells. And so having this heterozygote advantage, I can still get my oxygen and I can protect against malaria, is going to be a heterozygote advantage in specific areas in Africa. When you get to some place like the United States, where we have modern medicine, despite how expensive it is, we typically don't have malaria issues, and so the sickle cell anemia is no longer adaptive.